Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to cover the topic of carburetor synchronization, or as it's otherwise known, carburetor balancing. So I'm going to give some advice first of all to those of you who are considering doing the job of balancing the carburetors on your own motorcycle for the first time, and I'm also then going to show you the process of synchronizing the carburetors on my own Honda VFR 750, which I have here in the shed. So first of all, let's discuss some of the specialist tools that you're going to need to complete the job of balancing the carburetors on your motorcycle. So the first thing you're going to really need is something like this. So this is carburetor synchronizer. Okay, so what these are actually pressure gauges. So my Honda VFR 750, it has 4 cylinders, so I need a carburetor synchronizer that has 4 different gauges, vacuum gauges. Okay, so there's going to be one for each cylinder of the engine, because there is a separate carburetor feeding each of the cylinders. Okay, now this is a cheap Chinese made carburetor synchronizer. What I want to advise you first of all is avoid buying these cheap carburetor synchronizers. They can be identified by these cheap fixings here. So they're made from plastic. Okay, so they're commonly available. I think I paid about €25 for this particular gauge set, and they're absolutely useless. Okay, now the gauges themselves may actually be quite accurate. There might be nothing wrong with the actual gauges as vacuum gauges go, but the problem is these little fixings here. So when the engine is running and these are connected up to the carburetors, the little gauges, or the dial on the gauge, will be fluttering back and forth due to the vacuum going through the carburetor will be changing all the time. So you'll see the dial, or the needle, will be fluttering back and forth. Okay, and you can't get a good reading if the needle is fluttering back and forth non-stop. If it's just fluttering everywhere, that's of no use. So what you need is little dials that can actually reduce the flutter. Okay, now these have these sort of, like, I think they're kind of like gimmicky little I suppose they've put them on to probably convince you that you can actually control the flutter of the needle, but they're absolutely useless. They do not work. Okay, so they're meant to be acting as little valves. They don't work. They just they're pieces of plastic. That's all they are. They just slot in and slot out. They don't really do anything. So you avoid these sets. Okay, what you want to look for is get rid of that, put that in the bin because it's absolutely useless. What you want to get is a good set. Now a good set starts around €50, so maybe around $50 I suppose, or £40, £45. Okay, so I bought this I think I bought this in England, and this isn't a totally professional set, but it's very suitable for the purposes that you require for the amateur mechanic. Okay, working on their own bike. Now let me take out this gauge set. Okay, don't want to lose any of these pieces. Let's move them back in. So there's my gauge guile, or my vacuum gauges. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice on these vacuum gauges is that the needles are all pointing in the same direction. Okay, so they've all been set to zero. All been set to zero, probably in the factory or by the guy, whoever I bought it from. The other thing is that they have a little adjustable gauges. Good sets can be will have these little gauges that can be adjusted. So there's these little adjusters here, and they can be screwed clockwise or anti-clockwise, and they control the flutter of the needles. So you will see that in the video that I do in a few minutes. So look for vacuum gauges or synchronization tool that has these little adjustable valves, okay, and they will just make the whole job a lot easier, and you'll be able to get it done accurately. They are actually quite accurate. You can spend a lot more money on vacuum gauges if you want. I've seen some of them for sale for a couple of €100, and to be honest with you, I don't know if they'll do a whole lot of a better job. These are actually very accurate. I found these very good. Okay. They come with these little fittings. Okay, so make sure whatever set you get, it comes with all the fittings, right? And in the seller, wherever you buy it off, they should mention whether these vacuum gauges have the little control valves to control the flutter or not. If the seller does not mention that they have these little control valves, don't buy them. Okay, so I bought this set on eBay. So here's the little pipes. Okay, so these little pipes will connect into the vacuum gauge. Let me just show you them. It connects on here, so you will fit it on. It's held on with a little brass clip to keep it tight. Okay, so you want an airtight seal. So that fits into the gauge here, this end, and then this end here fits into the little adapter on the carburetor, and you will do it for all four of these. All four of these will have their own little rubber pipe which leads from the vacuum gauge to the carburetor. Now the other thing that this set comes with is these little adapters. Okay, now this all depends, whether you need these or not depends on the model of bike you have. Some motorcycles will have adapters built into the carburetors, and some motorcycles will not have adapters built in. What they will have is there will be a little what looks like a little Phillips head screw screwed into the carburetor somewhere, and you will have to remove that little screw, and you will have to screw in, see there's a little screw end here, you will have to screw in this little adapter into the carburetor, okay, and it will be sticking in like this, and then the pipe will feed from the vacuum gauge here. It will be connected to the vacuum gauge at one end, and then this end here will feed onto this little adapter. So that's what these little adapters are. Make sure that the set that you get has adapters. You will definitely need them if your model of motorcycle doesn't have adapters built in already. If the motorcycle has adapters then built in already, what the adapters will have is little rubber covers on the adapters, or something else, some little cover that can be easily removed. On my Honda VFR I have little rubber covers which I just have to remove. Okay, so that's the vacuum gauge, the synchronization tool. Okay, this is probably the most expensive piece of kit, or the most expensive tool that you will have to buy. The other thing that you will need is a flathead screwdriver. And the reason you will need a flathead screwdriver is because you need to make sure when you get your carburetor synchronization tool that the needles should all be set to 0. They should all exactly be set to the same setting of 0. Okay, Now this one came from the factory or from the seller with the needles were all pointing to 0, so they're all good. This one, this cheap one that I got from China, the needles, as you can see, this one is pointing to 0, this one is pointing to 0, this one is not pointing to 0, and this one is a bit off 0. Okay, so what you're meant to do is you're meant to remove the little caps. They actually screw off on this one. Okay, and before you begin the job of syncing your carburetors, you need to adjust the needle. So you need to set it to 0. You need to set all the needles to 0 so that they're all zeroed. So there's a little screw just here. Okay, it takes a little flathead screwdriver to adjust it, and it's for adjusting the needle before you connect it up to the carburetor. So we will just click it in here like so and just turn it. Okay, so you can see that the needle is turning. So I zero my carburetor synchronization tool. So that's how I do that job. And then I put my cover back on. Okay, so I just screw that back on, and I would do that for all 4 of the dials. Make sure that that's set. They're all set to the exact same 0 point across the way. Now, the other thing to note with the carburetor synchronization tool, you might notice as soon as you turn on the motorcycle with the carburetor synchronization tool connected up, that's all of the needles will be flying around the place. So again, don't panic. You won't be able to get a reading when they're all flying around the place. So you want to adjust the little control valves here through these little knobs to get the flutter down. So you'll start to see that the flutter reduces, so it'll be flying around like this, the needle, and then as you adjust it, it'll start slowing down, and then it'll come to almost a stop, and then eventually it'll come to a stop. Okay, you might notice that some of the or all of the needles, as soon as you connect it up to the carburetor and the engine is running, that the needles do nothing. Okay, so that doesn't look good. They stay at 0 even though they're connected up to a running motorcycle. Again, this is controlled by, or this can be remedied by the little control valves. So what you do is you open up the little control valves. I think you turn it counterclockwise, and it should open up the little control valve, and all of a sudden you'll see that the needle begins, it just shoots back to approximately where the reading is, and it should flutter around the reading point, and then you adjust it back to reduce the flutter, and it should then settle on the actual vacuum reading. And just to note on either this gauge here or this one here, there is actually 2 readings on these gauges. So when the needle goes, just use this as the needle, when the needle goes counterclockwise on this particular gauge, it's measuring vacuum. Okay, so there's the vacuum, it's measuring vacuum when it goes this way. So when it turns counterclockwise on this gauge, it's measuring vacuum. Okay, so that's where you would expect to see the needle. You would expect to see the needle when we get it a reading. We should expect to see it moving down this way. It's the same on these gauges here. Okay, and then you see here on this one, on the other side, it says pounds pressure. If you connected up this to a bicycle pump, for example, and you started pumping in air, this would actually measure pressure. So pressure would be in the opposite direction. The air would be compressed rather than being a vacuum. So you would expect the needle to go this way. So that's what the 2 different. That's why there's all these different numbers on the gauges. Why it mentions vacuum and why it mentions pressure. Okay, just so you understand. You don't need the pressure gauge segment. We're not interested in that for this carburetor synchronization process. So there's 2 of the tools that I need. Okay, the other thing you're going to need is just a length of wire, and the point of the length of wire is to hang the carburetor synchronization tool. You need to, the leads here are not that long, okay, so you need to probably hang this somewhere close to the carburetors, probably just above the fuel tank. Now, you're not going to hold this by hand, okay, because you need your hands free. So what you're going to need is a little bit of a cable to connect in. There's two little points here, holes, and you put the cable through, okay, and you then need something to hang this vacuum gauge off, that you can hang it close to the let's say the fuel tank of the motorcycle. So I actually hang this off the roof of my shed. I have a nail or a hook drilled into the roof of the shed, and I connect this cable up to the two ends here, and I then hang my carburetor synchronization tool up over the motorcycle. So before you even turn on the motorcycle, make sure you get all these things sorted out. Zero your gauges, hang your carburetor synchronization tool. You should actually do a sort of a dummy run to make sure that these rubber leads are actually, or pipes are actually long enough to reach from the gauge to the actual carburetor. Okay, and then it'll just make everything a lot easier. Now, one last thing that I wanted to note on the carburetor synchronization tool which I have here, there is an alternative tool which you can use, which is called a manometer. Okay, now it's meant to be it's considered to be slightly more accurate a tool, but it's also a little bit more expensive. But I will leave a link in the description for the video on where you can actually find this particular set that I'm using here of vacuum gauges on eBay, which I bought on eBay, and I'll also leave a link for a recommended manometer that you can buy alternatively as well. Now, I have this tool here. This is a long needle nose pliers. On my Honda VFR, I could have not removed the covers from the adapters on the carburetor without this tool, because you will find that the adapters, or the points, the mounting points for the actual adapters, they can be buried in the most awkward places on a motorcycle. So this helped me be able to reach into really tight spaces. I might be only a hole this size, and I have to stick it in here and reach the whole way through and grab an adapter. Okay, and then the other thing is you can use this for gripping. Just lightly grip it, don't get it too tight, you don't want to damage the pipe, for putting it through the tight spaces and fitting it onto the adapter. I found this really useful. I would not do this job without this needle nose plier, and again I got this on eBay. And then the other job is, once you have your carburetor synchronizer hooked up to the carburetors, you have your readings, you might discover that some of the you might find that 3 of them are in sync, as in the needles are pointing in the same direction, and 1 of them is out of sync. So what you need to do is there is a little adjustment screw on the carburetors which you need to locate. Okay, and once you locate that carburetor, or that adjustment screw for the carburetor for a particular, let's say, cylinder number 4, I actually need, for my particular motorcycle, I needed a special this is a little special angled flathead screwdriver. So it fits onto the little screws that are the adjustment screws on the carburetor for my Honda VFR 750, but as you'll see later in the video, the screws are located in a really awkward place and are very hard to get to, and I actually need a long nose screwdriver to reach in, and then I need to be able to adjusted from a distance and at an angle. Okay, so that's the, unfortunately, I have to use a tool. So this is a specialist tool just for synchronizing the carburetors or adjusting the carburetors on my Honda VFR 750. You may not need something like this on your own motorcycle. You might need something like a simple screwdriver, flathead screwdriver on your own model, or you might need a very long straight screwdriver. If you do, that's probably a little bit easier to get a straight head screwdriver. These are actually hard enough to find. I can only find it on one website. So there's some of the tools you need, and then lastly, because I couldn't even see the screws just looking in straight, I have this little angled mirror just so I could stick it in and look around the body of the carburetor and just check the condition of the screws, check where the screws were. So that's just something simple that I needed. I found it quite handy, so you might not need it for your own motorcycle. And then you'll obviously need some of the usual tools like sockets, screwdrivers to actually remove fairings. You might have to remove the tank from your own motorcycle. It varies from model to model. And one other piece of equipment that you may require is some fuel line. Now, whether you will require this or not will really be dependent on the model of motorcycle that you are synchronizing the carburetors on. So my Honda VFR 750, I actually don't need any fuel line, a length of fuel line, so it's just one length of fuel line. I don't actually need it, but on some motorcycles you will need it, and those are the motorcycles if you have to remove the fuel tank from your motorcycle to get at the carburetors. You will still need to supply fuel to the motorcycle so that it can run while you're synchronizing the carburetors. So you would have to take the fuel tank off possibly, and you would have to place it on a table or some holding area beside the motorcycle, and you would have to connect it back in. It'll probably be a distance away, so you may have to connect some fuel line from the fuel tank to the actual back into the fuel system, so that you can continue to supply fuel to the motorcycle while the fuel tank is off the motorcycle. So the last thing I would recommend is that you get the workshop model for the workshop manual, or the Haynes manual, or the Climber manual for your particular model of motorcycle, because it will have exact instructions on how to go about the job of synchronizing the carburetors on your own motorcycle.